Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to the Reflex podcast. Our guests today are Chris and Jane from Zoom. So hello to you both. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hello, very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm really good, thanks. I'm very excited to be doing this. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Maria. We really are excited to be here.
Oh, you're welcome, Jane. So actually that leads nicely into the first question for you both, which is, could you please both introduce yourselves and just say what your roles are at Zoom? Chris, let's go to you first.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Maria. So my name's Chris Bayliss, and I head up our education and public sector team here at Zoom in the UK.
Perfect. Jane?
And I'm Jane Ross, and I look after our education vertical in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Now, Zoom, I mean, who doesn't know who Zoom is at this stage? It started in 2011, but obviously due to the pandemic, it shot up in popularity. I believe it was it 10 million daily meeting participants in March 2019 to about 300 million the following March, just a year later. I mean, that is a phenomenal jump. So quite a large number of these daily meeting participants would have been the education sector, obviously with lots of hybrid teaching at this stage. So for the early part of the pandemic, over to you, Jane. Can you provide any insight on how universities, higher education institutions were using Zoom at this early stage?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give you some perspective, I've been with Zoom. This month will be my 5th year. And so I had started at Zoom in the UK office long before the pandemic started. And I always like to tell the story because we were wildly successful already before the pandemic hit. And I looked after public sector. And so I had the healthcare, I had the government, I had education, and we were just getting off the ground. And so there was a lot of stage setting and just getting into the right frameworks and those types of actions. But we had a lot of proactive customers reaching out to us. And so, we had education institutions, mostly universities, that were finding their way to us already. And then through word of mouth, our popularity grew. And so we already had quite a large number of universities that were already taking advantage of the platform. And not only from a teaching and learning perspective, but from an overall administrative and staff usage. And so they were deploying site-wide subscriptions. And those universities that were early adopters obviously were in a really good place for when the pandemic hit. And so, yes, absolutely, let's call it early 2020, we saw a massive increase in requests for subscriptions. And the nice thing was that these customers that were first coming to us at that point had the luxury of going to their peers in the market who'd already adopted Zoom to find out, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And what's the best method forward? And so I think that really drove a lot of the interest in the platform when the pandemic hit.
Wonderful. So it wasn't just teaching then, like you said, it was definitely the admin. I think that's the side we always forget about, isn't it? It's the admin side as well, which is actually quite well, it's quite heavy, I think, especially in that early period. So thank you for that. Are there any features? I know obviously everyone's quite familiar with using Zoom at this stage, but are there features still that institutions and lecturers are still not using and you think that they should be to make the most of Zoom?
So this is kind of a tricky question. And the reason is because the visibility that we have into how our specific customers are using the software is mostly driven by conversations that we have with our customers. So we don't have visibility like in our back end and things like that. But when we do sit down and have these meaningful conversations, obviously meetings is by far the most popular product that's used by education. And of course, that's going to be an offshoot of that remote teaching and learning piece. So when we do sit down and have these discussions about, how are you using your subscription? What can you do with the software that you're not doing today? It typically lends a direction towards our other products. So things like Zoom Phone, Zoom Events, our webinar, and then to be honest with you, just general updates on our new product releases. I know me personally, I mean, we have been so aggressive in our product innovation that I find it, me personally here at Zoom, I find it hard to keep up with the product releases. So I can only imagine what our customers are struggling with, just to keep up with that. And so, it's our job as being responsible partners to our customers to sit down and have these conversations on a regular basis to let them know this is what's going on at Zoom, and how are we seeing other education customers around the globe putting these products to use for them. I'll tell you right now, for example, Zoom Contact Center is getting a lot of interest at the moment. So this is just, some of the ways that we help our customers identify places that they can put Zoom to use for them.
Wonderful. So, sorry, just to develop on that a little bit more, how can people find out about these regular product updates then? Do you think it's more up to the integrator or Zoom to keep them up to date, or is there a way for them to do it themselves?
So there's ways for them to do it themselves. The first thing I would highly suggest is subscribing to our Zoom blog.
Mm-hmm.
I do that as well. That's how I keep up to date on things. We also have our Zoom Learning Center where people can go out and find out more information and teach themselves about our products and services. And then, of course, we have our support center as well. And so all of those resources are a great way for customers to do their own research and get their own updates. But it's definitely upon us as well, and our partner organizations, such as yourselves, to go out there and make sure that we are doing a good job of messaging that out to our customers.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was really clear. So over to you now, Chris. Now that we are, touch wood, I am touching wood there, largely out of the pandemic, shall we say, how can higher education institutions consider using Zoom going forwards?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And it's a great question. And, in my team, I've got kind of 4 people focusing on education in the UK. And what I always encourage them to do is actually kind of park Zoom for a moment when we're speaking to our customers and actually really understand some of the challenges that they're going through. And particularly what we're hearing at the moment in terms of from a higher education perspective is challenges around, right, how do we embark upon a digital transformation? So Jane's mentioned, the early adopters of Zoom prior to the pandemic were well set up to kind of embrace this new world of higher, in the first instance, remote learning, but now hybrid and blended learning. But how can we help our customers to digitally transform not only the way that they deliver education to students, but also how staff, from admin staff, but research, academic staff, communicate and collaborate within the campus and also beyond. The second challenge that we hear about is around hybrid and blended learning delivery. So, universities are and higher education institutes are competing for students, right? And there are a lot of concerns at the moment among student population around cost of living, etc. So how do they deliver those like excellent learning experiences in a hybrid platform? And then finally, not finally, but the 3 kind of top ones. The final one of the 3 top kind of issues we're hearing around student well-being as well. So you've got, research suggests that 70% of students right now are experiencing mental health issues at university. So if you think about those 3 issues, those kind of 3 top issues that we're hearing about, and how Zoom can help, and how higher education institutions can use Zoom going forward, from a digital transformation perspective, customers know Zoom for video meetings, but as Jane kind of alluded to earlier, we're now so much more than that. So we're a full unified communications and contact center solution. So, I go into universities and there are like telephony platforms that are older than I am, which is worrying, which is quite old. And technology that's very much around having, kit on site, very much location-based technology, where we're taking customers on a journey whereby we elevate them into the cloud. So whether you're an admin staff member, whether you're an academic, whether you're in teaching and learning, it doesn't matter where you are on the campus. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're working from home. It actually doesn't matter where you are globally. You can still connect, collaborate, and deliver education services using innovative platforms like Zoom Phone to communicate. From a hybrid and blended learning perspective, again, we've got Zoom is one part of an answer to a university's requirements. There's a whole kind of plethora of other other technologies there, whether it's the learning management system, various different technologies. So it's really important to integrate. So Zoom's got a great integration story into learning management platforms to help deliver that hybrid and blended learning experience. And then finally, with student wellbeing, and this is something that's kind of really close to my heart. So when you've got a hybrid and blended learning environment, when we're kind of decentralizing the way that learning's delivered, how do you make sure that your students are still, do have a high level of well-being? And that's the key thing with Zoom Contact Center. So we're seeing a lot of use cases right now whereby Zoom Contact Center, where you can actually triage video and manage that in the same way as a voice contact center. You can make services available to students to check in over video with well-being and support officers. So lots of stuff we're doing. That's literally touching the surface, but those are the ways that I believe that HE institutions can use Zoom going forward.
Fascinating. So those three areas, just to clarify, one was the hybrid and blended learning. Second one is the well-being, and the third one is like the admin, as we touched on, for the more admin area. Is that right for the third area?
Yeah, in general, yes. So I think more general digital transformation. So again, moving away from having very much like site-based, location-based technology, premise-based technology, really enabling anyone to be able to work from anywhere. That's the key, and collaborate from anywhere. Brilliant,
thank you. Now, I think over to the big question now, which is, how does Zoom differ from MS Teams? It's the question that as an integrator, we are regularly, we come across. So it'd be interesting to hear from your point of view, how does it differ?
Thanks, Miriam. Look, it wouldn't be a discussion on Zoom without talking about our friends over at Microsoft and the Teams platform. And I think, firstly, the first thing that I'd like to really emphasize, there's a lot of kind of misinformation in the market. Let's face it, if you look at, and this is not just education, Microsoft and Google are in, kind of own the desktop environment across the world. And, if I look at, when I speak to HE institutions, it's a split between the Google houses and the Microsoft houses. The Microsoft houses will always have Teams bundled into their Office 365 agreements. And that counts for higher education, local government, healthcare. How does the Zoom offering differ? So the way I always kind of articulate this is that Teams is absolutely fine for talking about your students, so internal collaboration. But when you're talking to your students, when you're delivering external services, whether it's whether it is teaching and learning, collaborating with parents, with external organizations, the simplicity of Zoom and the frictionless nature of the video communication is why Zoom is the best option. And the two work together. We've got integrations into Microsoft Teams as well. You can actually launch a Zoom meeting from Microsoft Teams, which not a lot of people know. But that's the key thing for me. And if you think about, in the UK alone, at the peak of the pandemic, 13 million adults were using Zoom daily. People know how to use Zoom. There's a familiarity, there's an ease of use. That's the founding principle of Zoom. So that's the key difference. So when you're delivering, learning experiences, Zoom really is the best platform to use. But we also recognise that Teams has its use cases as well. But that's where we're really seeing the differentiation.
Interesting. So why have one when you can have both? I think is the summary there.
Absolutely, and both are used for different. There are different use cases for both. I think is the key.
Great answer. So. Finally, over to you again, Jane. What does the future for Zoom and education look like?
Well, let me get my magic 8-ball out.
Excellent.
So I want to go back to something that has always driven Zoom from day one of our launch, and that's customer feedback. And so our customers drive where Zoom's future goes. And we're still very strong in this area, actually the strongest. And even today, I have customers that will come to me and say, I know I'll ask you for something and you guys are going to have it out 6 months later. And so that kind of feedback that drives our innovation is key to us developing what our customers need and supporting our customers into the future. From an education platform perspective, we're looking at doing additional enhancements to existing features. So think about things like breakout rooms, language translation. And then we're also working with our Zoom apps team to create education-specific curated apps that will sit right inside of your Zoom meeting that you can launch as appropriate for whatever the particular interaction is you're having, whether with your students or training or et cetera. And then something that we are also working on is a proctoring support within the platform. So all I can say about that is stay tuned for more information.
Wonderful. Yeah, I must admit, I'm really interested in the apps. It's not something I've really looked into before, but after discovering the app, that can give me this nice little tag in the corner here for anyone listening to this and not seeing. I've got a nice little name tag in the corner. Thank you to a Warmly app. Yeah, I'm looking more into apps now, so thanks for that. Now this is to both of you. So Chris, let's start with you first. What do you think will be the next big change in the workspace? You don't have to be limited to Zoom here, but just generally in the workspace, what do you think is the next big change?
Yeah, it's such a big question, and I'll put some context behind my answer. So, I do a lot of presentations, a lot of speaking at industry events, not only in education, but across healthcare and local government. And, a couple of times I've thought, well, actually this question is last year's question, but actually it's very much today's question. So the workspace went through a huge shift during the pandemic, literally overnight, went from, predominantly in person to being completely remote. And now I think organizations are trying to work out actually what does hybrid look like, especially in the public sector and education space. So I think the technology is there, like the technology is proven, as Jane said at the start, the way that Zoom's been deployed globally proves that the technology works. I think the big change in the workspace is getting the people processes behind that right in organizations. So, what are the work styles that as an organization that we want to promote? So at Zoom, we can pick from three work styles. So, like kind of fixed, flexible, remote. But, I think organizations are getting their heads around that from a HR perspective. So I think a lot of the technology piece is kind of quite well defined. I think the big thing that organizations need to get their heads around is around the people and processes implications of that. Be interesting to see if Jane agrees with that.
Yeah, I like that one. Over to you, Jane.
I do agree with that. And then I would also add, not necessarily, well, I guess it does tie some to workspace, but just generally, one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing institutions dealing with and trying to manage is data. And what I mean by that is we collect so much data. And I don't mean we, I mean the proverbial we, right? So not just Zoom, but in general, there's so much data collection that is done on students, on faculty, on workers, and how do we, what do we do with that data, and how do we use it in a meaningful way that helps us move forward and excel in the future. And those types of discussions and conversations about, do we use AI technology to help funnel some of this data and figure out how to use it. So there's a lot of questions that are being asked right now. And as Chris mentioned, I myself as well attend a lot of events and speak at events, and this is always something that's coming up, especially at education events, is what do we do with all of this data and how do we use it in a meaningful way? So that would be the only other thing that I would add to what Chris said.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about, actually, which leads nicely into my next question. I mean, I'm going to be thinking quite a lot about those 2 points you've just mentioned, but do you have any final thoughts or anything you've mentioned that you'd like to highlight from our conversation?
I'm happy to start. Just some final thoughts that I try to leave audiences with when I speak or just having customer conversations is that take it easy on yourself. Everybody is trying to find, what's the answer to hybrid learning? What's the answer to this? How do I do this? How do I do that? It's going to change, and we're all learning as we go along. And so we have to take this all in stride. We're going to learn more as we get more experience. Technology is going to change. It's going to keep advancing. It's going to keep bringing us new ideas and new ways of working and teaching and learning. And just be open and keep an open mind and be flexible and realize that there is no permanent solution that you're going to carry forward for the next 10 years. It's going to keep evolving and it's going to keep changing, and it's all for the better.
Wise words. Thank you. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. Difficult to follow up on that, Jane. So like some really great final thoughts there. I think for me is, education, the thing I love about the education sector, theme of like learning and continuous development and improvement. And, hopefully we've given a few insights into how, from a technology perspective, we can help. But actually it's more than that. Jane, in Jane's role, we've got this huge network of like some of the best higher education and further education institutes in the world. I'd encourage you, reach out to us. We want to hear about your challenges, your opportunities, but more often than not, someone else, either in the UK or globally, has addressed those challenges, and we can connect you to those people that can help you to learn and improve. So yes, the technology is one thing, but I think for me, one of the biggest values of Zoom in education is that huge network we've got globally of educators that have been there, done that, may do something slightly differently that you can kind of learn from. So that's kind of what I'd like to kind of leave everyone with.
I think that's a very good point to finish on. Wise words too, the fact that, like you said, it's the network. Even if you don't have the answer, you'll know someone or quite a lot of case studies where people had done something similar. So yeah, thank you for that. So if any of our listeners would like to connect with you both, what's the best way for them to do that? Chris?
Best way to connect. So all mediums. So phone, email, social media, LinkedIn. So like I say, I've got a team of like 4 people in the UK focused on education. So get in touch with myself and I can put you in touch with one of my very capable team members who'll be happy to help.
And likewise, we have a growing team across the EMEA region now that's focused on education, which is really exciting, because it was just me and one other person back in 2020. So we really done a lot of work in the last, coming up on 2.5 years. And just as Chris said, any social platforms, email jane.ross@zoom.us. Give me a phone call. However you want to connect is fine, and we'll get you the right resources.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I mean, this has been a really interesting conversation, so it was definitely worth the wait. From the Reflex point of view, just to clarify for anyone listening that we are on LinkedIn, so that's Reflex Limited. We're also on Twitter @ReflexAV, or if you want to know more about this episode or any of our other episodes on the Reflex podcast, go directly to our website, reflex.co.uk, and look under the podcast tab. For now, it just leaves me to thank you, Chris, and you, Jane. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we can connect again in the future for part 2.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.